and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everyone. We have a very full agenda tonight and quite a few guests. I have no announcements. Is there any public comment from the board?
Pancake breakfast tomorrow morning, 8 to 10:30 at the Senior Center. All are welcome.
Is there any public comment from the public? Okay, let's get right into it. Our first appointment is a meeting with Vertex to discuss the property commission assessments for Town Hall, Ritter, T.C. Passios, Old Primary School, Brooks House, and Turkey Hill and Eagle House. So I'm going to turn it over to the town manager to run this portion of the meeting.
Okay. We have with us tonight Mr. Eric Nelson, Mr. Steve Kirby, and Mr. Philip Russo of Vertex. And they're here to present a summary of the property condition assessments performed at Town Hall, Ritter, Brooks, T.C. Passios, and the Old Primary School, Turkey Hill, and Eagle House. The written assessments for Turkey Hill and Eagle House have yet to be completed, so they will just have general comments on those two facilities. The property condition assessment looks at the current condition of the building, and one of the goals for performing these property condition assessments was to incorporate facilities capital projects into our overall capital plan that will assist in the development of a long-term facilities maintenance and repair program. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Vertex, and they have a presentation for the board.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Eric Nelson.
Could I ask you to use the microphone because we are being, yeah, please.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it comes out of that stand if you want to.
Oh, that's great. So my name is Eric Nelson. I work for Vertex. We're a 500-person engineering firm headquartered here in Massachusetts. We have offices all over the country, but our largest one is right here it's in Weymouth. We have another office in Boston. We were engaged by the town to do property condition assessments of the 5 buildings that you see on the slide there: Town Hall, Ritter Memorial, the Lunenburg Primary School, Brooks House, and Passios Elementary. We're currently working on Eagle House and Turkey Hill Elementary. We just finished those site visits at the end of last week. A little bit about what a property condition assessment is. And to back up 1 second, I run the property condition assessment practice for the entire company at Vertex. I've been doing that for close to 30 years. I do it all day and every day. It's the only thing that I do. We have a team of professionals throughout the company that we draw on for their expertise, and we did that in this particular case as well. Property condition assessment is very commonly performed by a single person who might go to a site and look at roofing, exterior, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire systems, sort of a building soup to nuts. But in this case, in discussions with the town and certain areas of concern on certain buildings, we decided to take a team approach and offer more expertise. So our team consisted of a registered architect who acted as the quarterback for this, a mechanical engineer, a structural engineer, a building envelope specialist, and also a hazardous materials specialist. And we used all those folks at most of these buildings. So these professionals, they're engaged to give an independent, arm's-length, third-party opinion of the condition of a facility. And they did so in their respective disciplines, and we pulled it all together in an individual report for each building. Is that frozen? The left mouse button should do it. or the right arrow. There you go. So our assessment was performed using sort of a specific protocol or formula. Property condition assessments throughout the country are commonly done with a specific sort of recipe determined by the American Society of Testing Materials. There's an ASTM designation for it. ASTM E2018-15 is a standard practice for assessing the condition of a building. And while what we're doing does involve sort of a subjective opinion of the people looking at the facility, the idea is to try to also come up with some objective measures of the condition of each facility, each component, each material, and each system. And then there's a formula that's followed where we basically analyze each one of those systems, components, or materials, estimate its useful life. How long is it supposed to last? We estimate its effective age, meaning how well is it being maintained? How much is it weathered? What's its current age? And then we use that formula to determine how much life that component, material, or system has left. That's the remaining useful life. Once that's complete, we categorize all those issues into 3 different categories. One is immediate needs, immediate repairs, and those are usually safety-related issues, or it could be a material or system has completely surpassed its lifespan. The second category is short-term repairs. So we look at those repairs that will probably need to be accomplished in a 1 to 2 year time frame. And the third category is capital needs, which is a longer-term repair or renovation. And in this case, we agreed with the town at the beginning of this project that we would look out 5 years. So once those issues, items, projects are categorized, then we try to come up with a cost estimate for each one of them. And they're done individually, so that you can almost, it's like an a la carte project. You could do one and not the other. The cost estimates are order of magnitude costs, so they're general, high-level costs, and we do that by estimating quantities using general estimating techniques, takeoffs from plans, capacities from machinery, and replacing like with like. So this is not an exercise where we are putting an addition on a building or changing its use. We're replacing like components with the same type of component. And that goes back to ASTM in trying to make the protocol objective and also the exercise repeatable. The primary estimating source that we used for this is RS Means Commercial Renovation Guide, 2017 version. Those costs are adjusted for prevailing wage and also for the town of Lunenburg right here. There's a geographical factor we applied so that those costs are adjusted for where we are. Once those cost estimates were established, we used what we call a facility condition index to sort of rank the properties. And this is a standard term that's used and a standard formula that's used in public buildings, schools, campus settings, and also individual commercial facilities. Essentially what it is you add the immediate needs and the short-term needs that we discussed, and you divide it by an estimated replacement cost for the building. And you come up with a percentage. And 0 to 5% is generally considered a good condition. 5 to 10 is in fair. And anything above 10 is considered poor condition. So this is how the rankings for the schools came out, or the buildings came out. The primary school had an index of 70. That's very high. Essentially what that's saying is 70% of the building needs to be replaced. If you were going to do individual renovation projects, that's what it would take. All the buildings were rated as poor in this objective measure. Our assessors had some ratings of fair in some cases based on their visual examination, but the numbers for the projects that we identified rank these buildings in this manner. So if we go to individual slides here discussing some of the buildings, the Lunenburg Primary School, as I mentioned, at 70% of the facility condition index, poor ranking. Square footage is 11,700, which is important because that's a number that's above 7,500 square feet, which is sort of the magic number for whether a building needs sprinklers. This building already has sprinklers, but they're in condition that we think they need to be replaced, so they're included in that $1.1 million number. The short-term repairs came out at just under $1 million, and you can see the longer-term repairs are small, and that's essentially because the building's in pretty rough shape, and because of that, most of the repairs would be taking place in immediates or year 1 and 2, and there's not a lot left to do as a capital improvement. For Ritter Memorial, we are at 28%. The building is smaller, so the numbers are smaller, obviously. We also identified here that there's potential costs for hazardous materials abatement, and that drives that number up. As part of what we did a sort of a general visual review of potential hazardous materials, and we did assume sort of the worst case, that those would need to be removed and abated as these projects take place. The short-term repairs at $190,000, and in this case, the 5-year projection includes some additional costs because of mostly because of air conditioning replacements. The Passio School, again, a ranking in the 20 percentile. $793,000 in immediates. Again, there's potential hazardous costs that are driving that up, hazardous materials costs and abatement. There's ADA modifications. In the short term, there's quite a few costs. Window replacements are driving that up quite a bit, roof replacement for a portion of the building. And then in this case, the capital needs are a little larger, and that's again because we actually projected window replacements to take place over a horizon of time. If that were to be chosen to be done all at one time, that capital need number would be lower and the others would be higher. For Brooks House, we're getting down closer to that 10%. We've got, again, hazardous materials are again driving that number up. There's ADA modifications. There are some foundation and structural repairs needed. Short-term roof and AC are driving that up. And then there's a lot less cost for the capital needs, basically continuation of some of the things that don't need it right now but will need it in addition to those 2-year items. And then lastly, the town hall, the building we're in, we're at 12%. Mostly, we do have ADA issues. We have some active roof leaks. The chimney needs to be repaired. The short-term repairs, we've got a roof replacement in there that's fairly costly. AC and heating replacements are driving that number up. And then again, continuation of some of those projects into years 3 and 5. So we did do an individual report, a very detailed report breaking down all those costs and all those items. I'm not presenting those reports here. Each one of them is very detailed and breaks down exactly what we saw and why we came to these conclusions, and those have been given to the town. We're working on those 2 reports also now for Eagle House and for Turkey Hill Elementary. We have some other items to talk about. I'm going to hand this over to Steve here, who works in our construction division.
Hi, my name is Steve Kirby. I work in the construction group for Vertex. We do OPM work. I exclusively work on public works projects. Part of what we wanted to point out on what we think is your plan to go in the future is certain things that have to be considered when we're looking at the buildings. One of them being sprinklers in existing buildings. Eric touched on it a little bit. There's been some Mass General Law 148, Section 26G. All buildings over 7,500 gross square feet is outside to outside dimensions as opposed to interior dimensions. Undergoing addition of major renovations. Renovations are considered major when you're totaling 33% more of that gross square footage. So that all depends on what you're doing on a particular building and its gross square footage. Renovations are also considered major when the estimated costs are greater or equal to 33% of the assessed building value. Now I know some of the assessments on the buildings in town are relatively low, so that ends up being a trigger for a building that doesn't have sprinklers. Some of these buildings do, so it's not an issue. Another thing that needs to be considered is energy code. Some of these buildings are older. They're not up to what the energy code is now. We start doing renovation work. We need to look at the current building code, which is now the 9th edition, and the energy codes that are part of that building code, and what you may have adopted in the town as far as stretch code. MAB accessibility, 521 CMR. Again, this is some of your buildings have accessible entrances and some do not. Work that's estimated to cost less than $100,000, only the work that's being, only a portion of that building that the work's being performed needs to comply to MAB. Work estimated to cost $100,000 or greater, but is still under the 30% of the assessed value of the building, needs to have certain things that MAB requires, which is an accessible public entrance, accessible toilet room, telephone, and drinking fountain. Certain work and certain use groups of buildings can be exempt from this. For work estimated to equal 30% or greater of the assessed value, that will require full compliance, and that can be a costly addition to doing renovations to buildings. And also, when you're determining the applicability of MAB, you have to take the additive of the last 3 years. So if you did some work on a building 2 years ago and you're planning on doing some more work this year, you have to add those amounts up to see if you've triggered the 30%. You can go to MAB and ask for permanent and time variances. A lot of times permanent variances are on historic buildings. If you're going to essentially certain aesthetic historic aspects of a building, for instance rails, front entries, can be requested to be exempt from MAB, and they will consider it, but you do have to go through a process. In other cases, if there is a plan to do work in phases and stages, the MLB will let you do some of the accessibility upgrades over time, but they will give you a limit. We just did a project where MAB has given the town 3 years to implement certain accessibility upgrades. So the next steps in what we believe that you guys are looking at is, as far as your assessment and your space needs study, you did that under the TAPE study. Property condition assessments, you've done that under Vertex, and we've got a couple more that we're going to be giving to you on the other 2 buildings. But the follow-up step is to develop a strategy for your future use of those 7 buildings. What do you want to use those for, or repurpose those buildings for? And that's something that you together need to take a look at and have an idea, because the next step from there is to go and proceed with the feasibility study schematic design, which would be hiring a designer to come in and take the TAPE report, our report on the condition of the buildings, and what you plan, or what your plans, you may have Plan A, Plan B, Plan C, for what you want to do with these buildings, and in order of prioritization. I mean, I know the TAPE report was looking at patios as being the new town hall, but maybe you've changed your mind on that. That's the next step you need to do. And part of that is getting a designer on board, which is developing a request for qualifications, advertising that in Central Register and the various publications that need to be done, conduct a briefing session for the designers. They'll send in their proposals, you'll shortlist and interview, you select and hire that designer to provide you the feasibility study, schematic services, including cost estimates. And that's obviously, that's what everybody's looking for, is what's the work going to cost. And then ultimately you determine, using the feasibility and schematic design and the cost estimates, which direction you want to go with, both financially and functionally, for one building, two buildings, or all of them.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Mrs. Bertram?
I do have a few questions on the specific report, and I'm not sure if we're going to get to that level, Mr. Chairman, but having reviewed it, I have a couple questions, so can I go ahead?
Sure.
Okay. The old primary school, there is a suspected asbestos and lead allowance, and it includes replacement of the floor, wall, ceiling coverings to restore the building interiors to a vanilla shell suitable for additional tenant configuration. But I'm not quite sure what configuration that is. I didn't see anything in the report that indicates what that consists of. Is that replacements of the existing walls as they stand, or what is that configuration that's included in that $471,000?
Please.
Because the building is in the shape it's in, and we don't know what the use is, that's what the vanilla shell assumption is, that partition walls will be constructed, standard floor, wall, and ceiling finishes will be constructed, but where those walls are, how many there are, how many rooms are demised, we don't know. So it's essentially an allowance for an interior renovation.
Okay, but it doesn't identify what that configuration
No, it
is, so
does
that could
not.
go up or down?
It could go, and it would go up or down depending
Right.
on how the building is configured and what you intend to use it for.
Okay, and it also talks about, in that building, it talks about removal of the troffer fixture. What is that?
That's a fluorescent light, that's a box.
Okay, because it's a pretty costly item, so I was just wondering, I didn't understand the explanation. $91,914?
It's throughout the building, so.
Okay, so it's removal of that fixtures throughout?
Placement.
Okay. The abatement on that building, there's talk, and no decisions have been made yet, that's what we're still trying to flush out, what the final plan is, but there has been some talk about removing that building, the old primary school. The abatement cost of a hazardous material, you estimated at $308,400. That would have to be done regardless of what we chose to do, if we chose to renovate it or if we chose to remove it. Am I correct?
It depends on the individual project that you chose to do, but on that building, yes. There's so many projects that are needed,
Okay.
and they're so intertwined that yes, you'd have to do that remediation.
Okay. And
Prior
if-
to those, or prior to demolition.
Prior to demolition? Okay.
So, but it wasn't, that price wasn't included in the demolition cost, but it
No,
should
there's an
be.
additional demolition
No,
cost.
it's-
Yeah, and
But I mean, the demolition cost looks pretty low. But
Okay,
you have
but you have to
that
do
price
the
is not
abatement,
in-
where
then
did
the
you see
demo.
demolition cost? Because that was one of my questions.
59.4.
59.4?
Yeah.
Was that in
36
this
plus
report?
22.
Yes.
Okay, because I
66K.
missed that.
About
Okay.
60K.
Okay. About 60,000. Okay, so that's not included in that doesn't include the 308.
No, and that number is fairly conservative in that we don't, without sampling and testing all the materials, we don't really know the extent of where they are and what it would cost to remediate them until we've done that next step. So our review is visual to look
Okay.
for suspect hazardous materials.
Yeah,
But those have to be confirmed by testing before you can actually abate them.
okay. And same with the Brooks House, which identifies
all
the
the-
abatement,
same with
right.
all of them,
The
yes.
abatement of the hazardous materials in that is $90,000. I missed the demolition costs, I don't know
Yeah,
how
the
I
demo
missed
on
them.
Brooks is 37.8.
37.8?
Those were sent separately, so.
Okay, so maybe I just,
But you know, one thing is that abatement cost isn't listed in for town hall.
because I don't think they found any suspect hazardous
We
materials.
didn't, so in the beginning of this project, we didn't propose to do the town hall as part of that. We didn't, so that's the one building that our hazardous specialist didn't come to.
Oh, so that's
Oh.
not, that's important to know.
So, so that there would be a sum.
There could be.
For that.
There
Could be.
We didn't, at the time when we talked about the different specialists we were going to send, this was the least likely, so we did not do it on this building.
So,
Okay.
when you talk about abatement and consulting cost, is, how soft is that number? For all
I
the
think
buildings?
it's fairly conservative, meaning it's probably high,
Probably high,
yes.
for all of the buildings?
Yes, but, so it takes into account sort of a worst-case scenario. And the reason for that is that if you had to do this, if you were doing these projects individually and you had to abate things individually, it would drive the costs up, as opposed to if you were doing a property-wide abatement all at one time. Just the level of volume and economies of scale you would gain would drive that cost down.
Now, you know, the costs that you put on the buildings you have go from 90,000 to 755,000. If you added town hall in there, where would that be?
I don't know, I can't speak to that. I could get that information or get an estimate, or we could have somebody come back and look at that. But I
No
don't-
idea.
I don't know, no, it's not, it's outside of my expertise, so.
All right.
Sorry.
Would you mind, just for my own information, because I did miss the demolition costs, can one of you guys just identify what the demolition costs are?
In the primary school, the abatement was 308, the demo was 59.4, so the
Okay.
total was 367
Okay,
and change, 367.8. The Brooks was abate 90K, demo 37.8, so it would be the total of those two. The Passios is abatement of 755, and demo was 337, so that's $1 million or so.
okay, and the Ritter for demolition?
The
was that-
Ritter abatement was 134. And I don't think we asked him to do demo on the Ritter
Okay,
or the
okay.
town hall. When
Okay,
we put the original proposal
okay, so just
together.
demolition on the Brooks, the
Right.
primary, and the Passios, okay. Okay, I had the abatement costs, but
That's
somehow I missed the demolition costs. A couple interesting things to note, and I just want to make sure I understand. The Ritter building, there's an estimated cost of $3,500 to engage a contractor to investigate and recommend options for positive drainage on the north side, because you observe some staining and some problems with drainage. But I want to make sure people understand that if we did spend that $3,500, there's no allowance for any repairs associated with that. Okay, and that's in several different things. So, for example, there's an allowance of $7,500 to engage a mechanical engineer to determine if some of the systems are adequate for the facility, but there's no associated costs if there are issues found. So, and that's in a couple of the buildings. You recommend engaging another professional,
Correct.
and you identified that cost, but you didn't identify any repairs because obviously you can't predict what they would be.
Correct.
Okay.
That's exactly right.
Okay, a couple things that struck me about the life safety systems, and it's really, I guess, a question for facilities, is there are, specifically in the town hall, there's a budget allowance to test the life safety systems, but reportedly, we have Millennium Alarm Technologies do periodic inspections, at least annually on those, but there's no inspection tags. So it's noted in the report that if we can show those inspections, then that cost we wouldn't have to include. And there's a couple buildings that note is also noticed that there's no inspection tags. So are we doing the inspections on the life safety systems?
I would have to defer to the DPW director.
Okay, so then my question would be, why are the inspection tags not put on? Okay, because if we could follow up with that and moving forward, I think it's important that those inspection tags be placed on the life safety equipment, because that's noted in a couple different places, that it's noted that they don't know when the last inspection was because there's no inspection tags. So I think just moving forward, it makes sense to do that. The inspection on the range hood fire suppression system at the Passios, it wasn't current, and testing and inspection of that system would be required, but you didn't put any allowance for repairs in that, correct?
No, it's really the same situation as you just mentioned.
Yep,
It wasn't
okay.
tagged
Okay.
appropriately.
Okay. That's all I have right now.
Any other questions? I think as we look at the next steps, and certainly would listen to alternative opinions, I think what we're building here is, is various data that will support, once some decisions are made, some ballpark figures in terms of helping us position that for the town to consider any votes or any input. We're having the town input meetings on what people would like. We've specifically asked them not to worry about cost. Tell us what you I know some of the verbiage was, what you look for in a town, what you look for in a municipal office, what do you look for in a recreation space, what towns you have visited that made you feel good, et cetera. That's a piece of data. We have the TAP-A study, which is a piece of data in terms of matching up the space needs that were developed by the actual employees in Town Hall and the town manager, both town managers, the prior one and the current one. Now we have some ballpark but fairly technical information down to several subcomponents of building structure, building exterior, roof, building interior. But, if our plans aim towards demolition of a particular property, then we have to dig down and find out the specific cost of demolition of that property. If our plans lead towards renovation, then it matters, the different components around the roof and the windows, et cetera. But these are all just data points, and I think the important thing is the next step is for us to take all this stuff together and begin to give direction to the people in the town, like the town manager and the various facilities managers, to work with professionals like these to come up with a plan.
Well, I guess I would take a different tact. I think that this is a data point, and I think putting all that data together is important, but having these data points and now having the idea of the cost, and obviously they're estimated costs based on industry standards, and the only way we're going to, once we define what that plan is, then we can move forward with going out to bid and finding out what the actual cost is. But I would be loath to spend more money on additional professionals to flush out a plan without us at least formulating some, as was stated, option A, B, and C. Because I think we've got to now, I think this was a critical piece of data that we were waiting for to try to help define the plan. And right now, what we're looking at, if we were to repair all 5 buildings, we'd be looking at $2.3 million in immediate need costs and overall cost of $6.6 million. So obviously, we need to pare that number down significantly.
I think we're in total agreement. But my point is, I don't think we're trying to repair all 5 buildings.
Right.
We're trying to assess what we need as a town, what we want as a town.
Right.
And which of those buildings or which of those properties help us best address that.
But I think having these numbers now is a key piece of determining what that plan is moving forward.
Absolutely.
Which is a key
That's
piece,
all I'm
but I'm not
saying.
sure, I know we need to make a recommendation and narrow down the scope of
Yeah.
these studies, but these numbers are kind of the numbers to not do anything at all and just keep the status quo. It doesn't address future needs. This is, if we don't do something, this is what we have to do. It doesn't give us a data point of the cost of moving forward.
Right.
Right.
And part of that
Right.
goes to, I mean, even if you look at the Passios, that cost there is to do the entire building. And we're not clear if we did move town hall operations there, whether we would need to do the whole building or what the portion. So therefore, that gets into the, what do we need? What's it going to cost to do what portion of the building if we did that?
And are we looking to do like for like, which is what this is doing?
Right, right.
And that doesn't, this does, for instance, if you go just take the Passios, it's pretty expensive to do a lot of those things. Well, we are in this for the long haul. And as we talked about when we did the high school, at least a 50-year period. So when we go, we want to put sprinklers, we want to have energy efficiency, we want to have it be code compliant because we're going to need to keep it for a long time. So whether we built a new building or renovated a building, we're going to have these costs. And does it make sense to do these costs in an existing building or a new building, and that's part of the discussion. And so I think you're right, this is a data point, but this goes to what we're going to have to spend no matter where we are.
Right, but when we talk about, we've talked about possible demolition of the old primary and turning it into green space. We've talked about possible demolition of the Brooks House. Now we have at least a much clearer idea of what those costs are. And I think the point about using a portion of the building is a good one. In your report, when you consider the Passios building specifically, you talk about ADA costs and you talk about rehab of the whole building. I think Mr. Ebersol makes a very important point in that if we decided to possibly take a phased approach or just to use a section of the building, would only the section that was then available to the public and that had been modified have to meet code? Or would the entire structure?
I think it depends on the item that you're modifying, but what Steve talked about earlier is if you are impacting 33% of the building or more, then you're
Okay.
going to be triggered into making modifications of the entire building.
And I have a quick question about how you view accessibility as well in here too, but for me, no matter what we do, whether we keep these buildings, do a new building, renovate a building, I'm not personally interested in meeting just the code compliance of accessibility to what we have to do. I want it to be fully accessible. I don't care about the loopholes we can get around, the variances we can get, because if you want a variance for accessibility, you got to go down to Boston, you got to talk to Tom Hopkins, who's in a wheelchair himself, he's the director of the board, and tell him why he's not getting into your building, let alone the people in the town who aren't getting into your building. And I'm not interested in doing that.
Agree wholeheartedly. With a father that was in a wheelchair for years, couldn't agree more.
But it could drive decisions that say, if you recall, one of the original options was to renovate a portion of the Passios and demolish a portion of the Passios.
Exactly.
That could be the right solution.
Right, right. Or to
Or
renovate
not.
a portion of it and use it, so that's what we have to look at now. And now we have a better idea of what the costs are of what our potential options.
And when you think about if you started and you were going to build new, you've got to add in all of those demolition costs to get rid of what you don't choose not to use, which is a lot.
Right, but that may be cheaper than
Repairing
the building.
The
So,
repairing the
you're right.
building.
But that is
right.
part of the cost. That's part of the cost. The same thing we did for the high school, was that the
Right.
demolition cost for the old high school was part of the whole project that we borrowed.
And I apologize that I missed the demolition costs, but were those costs including regrading the property, or is that just strictly for removal of the building? Or what did that demolition cost estimate include?
Demolition and haul away, essentially.
Okay, but it's not regrading or vegetation or erosion, it's just removal and hauling
You fill the cellar
away?
hole to
Right.
make it at grade, but no,
Okay.
And
But
in
it's-
that point, I wouldn't be interested in demolishing until we had a clear idea of what we were going to use that space for.
Absolutely. That's the whole plan that we're talking about, right.
I think at the two extremes, what this data presents us is what it would cost on one level, short-term, to keep it open and use it, and what it would cost to demolish it. And then when we decide what we want to use it for, that's a whole different set of questions that we ask and estimates that we get.
And as was discussed when we did the building tour, somebody mentioned that, for instance, the Brooks House, somebody might be willing to buy it, move it, that type of thing, which then we would eliminate the demolition costs at that point. So, then somebody mentioned Sturbridge Village wanting to buy it, that type of thing. So, or somebody willing, or somebody willing to donate it to them so they could have another building within their time frame.
Just down the street.
I just wanted to ask before we moved on, when you're doing the accessibility analysis, and I'm looking at the town hall specifically, you either check it off as yes, no, or NA. Was that based on required by code that you would?
So that comes straight out of that ASTM protocol that I talked about.
Okay, but the check marks, do those represent full compliance or compliance with code?
It's each individual item, so it's compliance with, those check marks are representing compliance with that particular row of that table.
Right, but just, I mean, for an example, I'm looking at the doors and the door hardware right here in this restroom, that you have it checked off as yes, but that hardware and those door swings and that toilet room are not accessible. So we wouldn't need to do it under code as far as renovating it.
Correct.
But right now, it doesn't.
I understand your question now. Yes, that it's to get to meeting code, not full compliance everywhere.
Okay.
And to follow up your point, that, there's, for the town hall, there's $3,000 required to get to code in this building, in town hall.
Right.
But it's nowhere near what it would cost to make this a fully accessible building, which I'm not sure we have enough money to do. Anyway.
Right.
So I don't know that we're going to work this to a solution tonight, but I think there's an incredible amount of good data in these reports, and I think, I think all of us spent quite a few hours going through it, and we just touched it. And now we have to, take it to some of the next steps and blend it. What I was trying to say originally, and maybe I didn't communicate it, is, this data, along with our needs data, along with the town's input, will help us come up with some proposals that we can then bring back to either get scoped out for more precise prices or run it by the town for, does this sound like something you think we ought to be pursuing?
Yeah, I will say, I would certainly like to really define at least one scope, potentially a couple, and before we spend any more money on consulting, because I think we really have to flush out what the plan is.
Just a couple different scenarios of what to do with the building.
Exactly. And I think that, getting this information out to the public is important, because I think this is information that everybody's been kind of waiting to see and to review, just as we have. So are they on the website, or are they going to be made available?
They are not yet.
Okay, but they will be made available? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to open this up to the public, but we did invite the Finance Committee and the Capital Planning Committee to join us tonight. Are there any questions from any of the members of those groups that we can clear up now? We will certainly be working with you as we move forward. Great. Any further questions or comments, or can we thank Vertex for their work? And
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
thank you. Appreciate it. It's fascinating reading. I encourage you all to.
Not surprising in many ways.
Right.
Other than, I guess I was surprised by the 70% factor for the primary school. I knew it was really in bad shape, but to actually have it documented to be that bad shape, then.
All righty. Our next item of business is the town manager report.
Okay.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Just a few items, more announcements. The Summer Street Road Reconstruction Project was awarded, or the award results came out. The bids were received February 6th, and the low bid came in at $1.2 million under the office estimate. The apparent low bidder was Baltazar Contractors of Ludlow in the amount of $7,105,195. It will take a few months for a contract to be finalized between Mass DOT and the contractor in time to mobilize, but the project should start in late spring.
So this is substantially under the original estimate, I believe, isn't it?
Yes, 1.2 million under. The original office estimate was $8,370,731.
I'm just wondering if this is going to affect our accelerated project, because we had funded this, the MPO had funded this over a 2-year period, because originally the dollar amount exceeded our target range, and now I'm not sure that it will. So I'm not quite sure what's going to happen with the tip on that. We may need to have an amendment to the tip because of this.
But it shouldn't affect the timeline, right? Because theoretically, it's freeing up money on the second year?
Yes, but it potentially pushes projects out in 18, so I'm not quite sure how it's all going to flush out, but I'll keep you posted.
And both the DPW director and I are familiar with the contractor a little better, and they're a good firm, so that was positive.
And Chase Road was awarded to PJ Albert, is that correct? That's what I
Yes.
was informed of by Arthur Frost of Mass DOT. Okay.
Okay. The Business Town Partnership meeting is scheduled for February 26th at 10 a.m. The meeting will be held at the library community room. This notice is up on the town Facebook page, and everyone who attended one or more meetings this fall was part of the distribution list for notification of this meeting, and this notice will also go up on the town website and be posted. The Complete Streets Survey is now an active link, and it is on the town Facebook page and will be on our town website as well, and will be made available, hard copies will be made available at the library, school, senior center, and town hall.
So where will it be on the website?
It should be up tomorrow
Okay, great.
on the main page, under the Community Streets link.
Great. I had a question about a recent town manager report. It included council office hours occurring only once in February and once in March, and the February office hours were totally booked by January 31st, and the March office hours, which are like in the middle of March, only have 2 slots left, and I was wondering when they were going to go back to being twice a month.
That was an accommodation they made at the beginning of the year. We were, the contract is monthly office hours, not twice a month. So they did make that accommodation for the town to begin the first part.
Yeah, but, as we discussed earlier, I think it's a bait and switch, because they really made it sound like there would be a lot of office hours when they gave the presentation, and that's the major reason that I voted for that firm, and I feel like I was had.
Well, they've actually had people sign up for slots that don't show up, and it has been basically almost the same people coming to those office hours, not new people coming.
That was going to be my next question, is
Right.
is it continually the same people coming, and do people only get one slot, or can they take 2 or 3 slots? And so
They can take multiple slots.
Okay, and I guess if we're going to go back to 1 month and people can't book, I would request that people be allowed 1 slot, so that they're not monopolizing the entire evening. If there's no other people that are looking for slots, that's fine. But if there is people that need that time, I think it's important that everybody has to share the time.
No.
So I would ask that if other people are interested in booking, that people only be allowed to do 1 until a couple days before, and then if there's empty slots, then they can, potentially take them. But I think it's important that it be shared across all boards and commissions.
Yep. And town council has been accommodating. There was a situation this last meeting, it was booked up, and that person contacted me. I contacted council to see if he could stay a little beyond hours, and he did for that person to come in. So we can.
My question is whether people are not able to do it, that The fact that it's full is important to know, but if somebody's not being, we should track that, and if it's just enough, then we're there.
Now, I've been able to access the doodle through your email. Is there another way to access it?
It's a link, so no.
You know what I mean? Because if I have to go back and find your email if I want to go in to see how many people signed up. So it's kind of awkward.
Well, you can save the link you can save the link to you can bookmark the link.
Oh, all right. Good thinking.
Just a question on the Complete Streets survey.
Yes.
Is there a way that maybe we could, like copy and paste the survey or something and give it a separate one to the high school kids or something like that? Have them do it in homeroom?
The school is included in the distribution, so I contacted the superintendent about providing those, but you would like the students themselves to?
Yeah, they're the ones walking the most in the center of town, and whether we want to, if you can make a separate bucket,
I was just
because they're
gonna
not
say a
technically
separate-
voters or
right.
something like that, but it'd be good to get their input, I think.
Yeah, I think if we could identify them not by name, but just that student's response, and it would be really interesting to see, because they're the young people in the future generations of Lunenburg, to see what they consider to be important for walkability.
And they have less options. They only have,
Exactly.
they can only walk.
Exactly.
You have anything else on town manager?
Nothing.
Okay, now we skipped over interviews and appointments
There are
because I don't have any listed here. Okay, fine. Our first order of current business is workshop on action items. Now, there's something in your package that is called
BOS agenda.
BOS agenda items, and that is our kind of to-do list that we've been building. And our objective is to go through that list now as a kind of a half a workshop, and do one of two things. Either, if we can dispose of any of these quickly, either by taking it off the list or making a decision, that's great. Or if it's a bigger item and we want to take it up, let's prioritize it in the sense of make it part of a future workshop that we work to resolution. Okay? That's the objective. So the first one on the list is posting of town-related business on social media.
So we've started doing it. We have the Lunenburg Facebook page. I think we just want to keep this on our list to check to see how it's going, and ask the town manager to report on how that's being posted.
Is it still interactive?
There's no option to turn off comments.
But you don't have to respond.
Well, once the comments are there, other people can comment on the comments.
It has, on the town Facebook page, it has not been a time-consuming effort. There's been, the postings are informational, meeting notices, the survey, things of that nature. It hasn't, there was one thing that was actually very helpful today. Someone wanted clarification on the Complete Streets survey about whether one meant highest priority. So we quickly changed that to clarify that within the survey, so it was very clear. So that I consider good feedback through that means.
And does our Facebook page list our social media policy on it?
It does.
Okay.
It does.
I think that I'd like to see us spend some time on this relative to what I'll call the sub-town related pages, the police site, the fire site, the animal control site, any other town sites, so that we kind of see them as a whole and we use those sites as our primary information deliverer, if you will. And I don't know that we can kind of do that all tonight, but I feel it's important enough that we spend, a portion of a workshop, maybe it's part of our policy discussions or something.
Right, and I also think if we're going to talk about other Facebook sites that are managed by other departments, I think it's important that we invite the individuals that are managing those pages to that workshop.
Yep.
And we may think about cross-posting, automatic cross-posting.
Exactly.
I guess some people follow one versus the other, or what's the policy about that?
Yeah, I think everyone that we want to try to get on the same page, it's important that they all be invited to the same meeting.
It also relates to the rollout of the new website, because the town manager has notified us that people will be able to sign up for automatic updates from certain sections of the town website, which may be a way of not supplanting, expanding on the social media. And in fact, some of those things may automatically go to the Facebook page as well. So I think some of that's going to go to the social media, because social media is not just Facebook. I mean, social media is our website, and our website might become the social media official site, and there may need to be some other ways of communicating with the public as well.
I mean, we'll have to determine how much time it takes and who's going to manage that.
Yep.
That's why I think it deserves
Yeah.
at least a slot on a workshop
Yep.
schedule. But I agree, we should invite the right people,
Yeah.
and we should combine it with our website, because that's part of our social media
Right, so
strategy.
obviously IT should be there.
Right.
I think this is important enough to have its own workshop.
Yeah, I
Okay.
do too. I
Okay.
do too. And I think, I just want to say, I think it's really important. While I understand the concerns about time management, but we want to, we keep talking about getting people involved and getting information out there. This is the way to do it. Because that's how everybody's staying connected these days.
So there's time to just post.
Right.
There's other thing, if you're going to allow
Right.
comments back and how that's
Right.
moderated.
Right.
So there's different
Right.
levels
Right.
of time, so.
No, I would just want to go back to something you just said, Heather, is that there's no way to turn off comments?
No.
Okay, so, that's important. I mean, and when we say not respond, well, if people are commenting and we don't respond, that's certainly not open communication. So I think we do have to talk about it.
Unless you have a policy that tells them that you are not responding. So if you're
Right.
not going to respond, you need to let people know you're not doing it.
Exactly.
There is an
Exactly.
option within the settings to do an automatic response. You can put
So the
in
automatic
similar to an
response
email
might be to
automatic
contact
response.
such and such,
Right.
or, yeah, and you can be directed to the appropriate party, or,
Right.
Yeah, because when I went to 2 different workshops on social media, and they both said, if you're going to you have to really think about it before you make it interactive. So it was my assumption it didn't have to be interactive.
Okay, well, let's make this a workshop topic, and let's get all our,
And let's test it out. I mean, at the workshop.
Right.
Let's play with the website, and let's play with the social media and see what and we'll see what it's actually like. And I think that'd be a good way to do it.
Yeah, so maybe one of the collaborative rooms, or one of the technology rooms, or that might be a good way to do it.
okay, so our first one, we created a workshop. Hopefully, we don't get 17 workshops out of this list, but that's an important one. Plowing of the sidewalks on Mass Ave. Now, that's,
I would think that should include more than just the sidewalks on Mass Ave.
Well, I actually asked that this be on the agenda, or on the list. I had sent an email to Heather. I think all of you received an email from a resident that's concerned about paving, and the lack of paving of a section of
Plowing.
plowing on the sidewalk from St. Boniface to School Street. And, Jack, our DPW director, responded, and there was a subsequent email Jack responded to. But it raised some concerns in my mind, because if we're plowing from School Street down, which we are, and we're not plowing the other half, and we're plowing the sidewalks in the remainder of the town, it raises a real concern for me. I understand historically it was done for a disabled student, but there was a concern raised in one of the emails from our DPW director that we could not perform work in the state's right-of-way. So I actually, the day after that email, I was at an MPO meeting and actually asked Arthur Frost and Sarah Bradbury of MassDOT District 3 about sidewalk plowing. I explained to them that we were concerned because the sidewalk was not being plowed, explained the section that wasn't being plowed, and Sarah Bradbury indicated she'd look into it. But they suggested we follow up with someone at the state, and I believe Jack may have done that. But I asked about the restriction that would disallow the town from plowing, and Arthur Frost, who is the head of District 3, is not aware of any such restriction. And he said that they would actually welcome the town's assistance.
you'd think so.
But there is a reality that if the state's responsible for doing it, we should have the state do it, and the entire length, not just a portion of it. But in my opinion, we either stop plowing the portion that we're not responsible for, or we should plow the whole thing. Because it doesn't seem to me that we should be plowing a section and not the other section. Especially if we're plowing the sidewalks and in the remainder of the sidewalks in the town.
Are we?
And,
Yes,
yeah, we do plow because we don't have very many sidewalks.
right.
I would ask that the town manager work with the DPW director to research this and report back to us.
Well, I think that as road commissioners, I would say, I think Jack has researched it, and I think there's not really an answer. And I think that as road commissioners, I think we need to make a decision, because I think that a resident has raised a valid point that a portion of the sidewalk is being plowed by the town, and the other portion isn't.
But I would say is that I think that more work needs to be done, including talking to town council for what our legal liability. Mr. Frost may have said that there's no reason why we can't. I want to know what our liability is to when we take over responsibility in a state road. I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing this. I also want to find out, ask the town manager, because we can't make the decision tonight. I don't feel comfortable making the decision tonight. I need to know, what's it going to cost us? Can we do it? If we can, I'm of
Okay.
a mind to say, if we put in a sidewalk, we should be doing it.
Yeah.
That's where I am right now, but I want to have additional information to find out what our liability
Well-
is, what's it going to cost.
Well, I would argue then that we shouldn't be plowing any of it. Because if you're going to raise concerns about a liability for the section from School Street to St. Boniface, but yet you're going to plow from School Street down to the school, then I would say that we've already opened up the liability and we've already done that. So either stop all of it until we get a resolution, but don't penalize the people from School Street down to St. Boniface. I mean, why are we plowing, if the concern is liability and legal issues, that's fine, but then stop plowing, period, on that section of the sidewalk. Because, I think we need to make a decision. I think we need to either stop all of it and put all of it on hold until we get a final decision from the state and council, or plow all of it, because you can't have it both ways. We shouldn't, if the concern is legally we're opening ourselves up to liability, then stop, which frankly, I think we should just plow the whole sidewalk. I think it's a very small section. Kids walk to school. They need to be safe. I think our liability to putting kids in the roadway is much higher than plowing the sidewalk.
I agree. I think we should do both things. I think we should plow it all and look into the liability.
I think this is a pretty simple question. I mean, we're in a pretty simple request, and we're plowing a big portion of it already. And we're putting the kids that live on that end in the road, and we're keeping the kids that live on the other end on the sidewalk. I mean, it's crazy. Plow the freaking sidewalk.
I'd say, I'd request that we, like Bob said, have the town manager look into it, see if the state should be doing it, whatever, but in the meantime, I would say just plow the thing. I'd suggest we give that directive to just plow it till we get the answers, but
I would agree with that.
still pursue the answer.
I would agree with that.
I agree with that as well. Can I hear a motion to that effect?
A motion to plow the entire length of the sidewalk from the end of the sidewalk on Mass Ave towards the school to St. Boniface, and in the interim, continue to follow up with the state as to their responsibility and town council about any potential liability for the town.
Is there a
And the
second?
cost.
Second?
So
Any discussion?
my question is whether this is on our agenda.
I believe it is, and my rationale for that is it's one of the workshop items that's been on our list. We said we were going to deal with them.
But it's not on the agenda posted at Town Hall. And I'm not opposing the motion, but I don't believe that we can legally act on this. I believe that the town manager and the DPW can take the action that we want them to take. But
Well, then I'm
I
not
don't-
sure it makes sense to even go through the list, because we're going to end up in either workshops or future agenda items, so we're wasting our time. So all of these items should go on the agenda.
Well, that's what we're trying to decide, what things need to go on the agenda.
Well, all of them, we shouldn't be talking about them.
No, we can
They're
talk.
not on our agenda, Bob.
We're talking about things that we want to put on agendas to discuss, and what we're not going to discuss because we completed. This is not an agenda that went out to the public for them to be able to say, public access to Lake Shirley, for instance. I would think people from Lake Shirley would like to come to a workshop that we need to have.
All right,
to
so
decide-
then rather than having discussions about items, let's just review them and decide what should go on an agenda, because I don't want to talk about them then. I don't want to waste my time. If the result is going to be that we have to put them on an agenda,
The
We will
things-
have an agenda item for, how about next Tuesday for the plowing the sidewalk on Mass
Yeah.
Ave.
And I think some of the things we can say, we've already taken care of these things, or here's how we think we need to address them, but we really can't take votes that the public has not been made aware of what we're going to be talking
Okay,
about.
so number 3, which is the rotary at Whalum, is an agenda.
Well, not necessarily. I think, I was going to suggest that's part of complete streets, and we'll deal with it as part of, it can come off our list, but we'll deal with it as an agenda item
Within the complete streets planning
inside
process.
of the complete streets process.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Facilities maintenance consolidation.
What was this about?
That was whether the town wants to devote resources, not necessarily add headcount, but devote resources to maintain all facilities regardless of who owns them.
That's an
A center
agenda
of
item.
expertise, that's an agenda
That's an
item.
agenda item.
Yeah, this has come up during the charter process as well.
Yep.
'Cause
Public
that-
access.
And I would suggest in the workshop that we invite the schools, because part of the discussion comes up with whether how we do the schools versus the towns versus other items.
Okay. And maybe we just want to hold that agenda item until after the Charter Review Committee goes through it to see if it's one of their agenda items or not. But either way, it's
Yeah.
an agenda item when we schedule it. Public access to Lake Shirley.
It's an agenda item.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I have actually a couple, I don't know how you want to handle this, but I have a couple questions and concerns, and I think that when we do put it on the agenda, we need to have town council
Yep.
up there. He needs to be aware of the history of the title search. Obviously, there's a liability and insurance concerns. But I also, in looking at town-owned property on Lake Shirley, I was shocked at how much property the town owns directly on Lake Shirley. And it's available, readily available on the assessor's website, and I would recommend that that information be compiled before that meeting. And specifically, I have questions regarding the lot known as, quote, Stump Cove, which is a 3.3 acre parcel. I would like to have Conservation Commission involved in this agenda item because of environmental concerns. Across the street, there's a 6.7 acre parcel directly across the street from that, and I would question
Across the street.
from Stump Cove.
That the town owns?
That the
Across the-
town owns. So this is Stump Cove, this is the piece across the street.
Oh, okay.
So there's almost 7 acre parcel directly across the street. So if you were to tie those pieces of property together, does it make sense? Or why have we not sold the 7 acre parcel? So there's a whole bunch of questions this agenda item raises in my mind because
Yeah, I think that we should change this from public access to Lake Shirley to town interest in Lake Shirley
exactly.
property, interest in Lake Shirley itself, and the dam, because the town took ownership of the dam, and the question becomes whether the town took ownership of the lake,
That's
or
a
a portion of the lake.
Right. Well, what happened, and let me just give you a little bit of history on this, because this was a big issue several years ago. We actually ended up doing, because when the chemical cost started, the chemical treatment started on Lake Shirley, the question of does the town own the lake came up. And we actually, at a pretty high cost, did a title search. Copeland and Page did a lengthy title search and found out that really it's very unclear who owns Lake Shirley. The town certainly has an interest in Lake Shirley, but is not the sole owner of Lake Shirley. It's a very cloudy title. But obviously, my concern is raised about assuming costs of chemical, assuming costs of recreational water, and potential liability.
Including
So
the conservation asking whether we should be weighing in on
Chemical,
installation of docks.
Right.
So-
And we, right, exactly. And we actually are listed as the applicant on the chemical permits because the assessors list the town of Lunenburg as the owner of Lake Shirley. And it's very unclear that we are in fact the owner of Lake Shirley. When we took ownership of the dam, it's very clear we own the dam. And when we did that, there was a requirement by the state that the lake be considered publicly accessible. And that's how we ended up with that 3.3 acre parcel known as Stump Cove. But if the deal with the state was you have to make it publicly accessible, let's face it, Stump Cove does not make it publicly accessible.
By kayak, maybe.
No, not, I actually walked it today.
Oh, okay.
So I really think this is an issue that we need to talk about. We need to invite the LSIC,
Yeah.
and we need to have counsel, and we need to have the background about the entire history of Lake Shirley.
So we're in agreement that's an agenda item, but we need a lot of pre-work to make sure we have the right questions and the right
Exactly.
people here.
Exactly.
Sounds like half a workshop to me.
Sounds like a whole workshop.
Might be a Saturday morning.
Yeah. 9:25 what?
I just want to add to that, Bob's point about a Saturday morning, I think it would be fantastic. I mean, I know I drove out there today to walk it and to really look at it, and I think that's important. You know, conservation does site visits. If it makes sense, maybe to
We know
consider a
what it
site
is.
visit.
Right.
Okay. 925 Mass Ave, which is the gas station. My recommendation is that, although it keeps coming up as an individual item, it's really no different than any of the other tax title issues. And,
Yes, it is.
well, it is.
Yes, it is.
Well,
So,
are we going to do anything with it?
I would, well, I'm newer to the discussion than most of you are, but I would, for the frequency that I get asked, what are we going to do about it? And the quality of the answer I'm able to give people when they ask me that, it doesn't satisfy me. I mean,
No, and it's an eyesore. We need to have it addressed. In my opinion, we need to address it.
So we do need to discuss it. Part of the issue, and I've been one of the ones to say we've got to be careful for what potential liability, because when you take a property, you own its environmental damage as a owner in line of title. Now, granted, somebody else may have greater ability to have the responsibility, including the gas company that may or may not have an interest in the property. At the same time, this is part of the village district, this is part of, next to Marshall Pond. It's a, it could be a conservation entry to the pond for reuse, other things like that. I think the fact that we have not taken it for taxes is a town action, so I think we do need to continue discussing it. There's been various various grant programs that could be
I was just gonna
available.
say that,
But some of it depended on whether we owned it or not. So I think we have an obligation to take some action to try to make this change.
I agree. And I think
I
that,
just want to, I don't disagree with anything you said, but I mean, we're struggling with the 5 properties in town center that we already own and trying to figure out what to do with them, and this adds to the portfolio.
And I'm not proposing that the town take it on, but I think that the town should work with the state legislature, whoever we need to make this property productive again.
So it becomes an agenda item, at least a workshop item,
Yep.
possibly.
I don't know that that needs a whole workshop. That
No.
could probably be
No.
combined with something else.
Municipal towing contract, that's been on the list a long time.
And remind me, do we have the police department, when they tow cars, do they have a contract with various towing companies to do that? They used to do that in the past, I don't know if we have it now.
They do not.
So who do they call?
They have a list of towing companies they use within town.
They rotate it?
Yeah.
So I guess the question, why is this here and not turn this over to the police department for normal business? I think this could be taken off of our list to make sure that, assuming that nobody's feeling like they've been left out as a towing contractor, that would be the only reason why I think we would be involved.
Would you just make sure that's okay with the police department?
Yes.
Okay. It's been on the list since I got here, that's the reasons it's still on the list.
So we're gonna ask the chief to work on that.
Right,
That makes sense.
unless for some reason he believes he needs us to get involved.
Yep.
Review of abandoned vacant properties.
The other thing is, it wouldn't be just the police chief, it could be the fire department if they need to have something towed, or DPW,
DPW.
that type of thing, so.
Right,
Public safety.
town. Review of abandoned vacant properties. Now, there is a list in here, just so you know the magnitude of it.
And that list was created by,
The building commissioner. I'm sorry, fire.
Who?
Let me look at.
I think
it
this has
was,
to be an
it
agenda.
originated with the fire department, I believe,
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
and was passed on to the building commissioner.
It's not, we can't really talk about the properties, they're not on the agenda.
I would say that would be a mini workshop with,
Are they like vacant as well as,
Looks like some are, some aren't.
okay.
It looks like, according to the list here.
I'd like to couple that workshop or agenda with.
6?
Again, with.
the gas station.
No, well, potentially with the
On
gas
the
station,
list.
but also I want to, and it's not on our list, is an update on town-owned properties. Because,
Yeah.
again, looking at Lake Shirley, I was shocked by how many properties the town owns around Lake Shirley. I mean, just to give you an idea, that I had no idea. So, do we need to own these properties? Are they valuable? Or should we be trying to sell them?
And that's from the assessor's database.
Yeah.
So the question becomes, is there an actual deed, or did we take it?
Or is it in tax title, or what's
Right.
the status? So I think getting an update on that would be very helpful.
Which goes back to our workshop that we did on tax title properties,
Yeah.
where we went through the properties of which ones did some of the other departments want to take versus let's get rid of it off of our rolls and back into productive use or the neighbor's use.
Yeah, exactly. So I think having that, the vacant and the either tax title or foreclosed on properties together makes sense.
Because there were because we went to town meeting to sell some town-owned properties, or was that?
That was the tax taking, wasn't it?
That was tax taking, wasn't it? I thought it was getting the funding to do the tax taking
No,
and then
no,
selling
there was
the
actually
product.
town-owned property that we had determined that we do not need anymore. For instance, the old highway barn.
Oh, right,
Oh,
right,
you're
right,
You're
right.
right, you're right.
In Leominster
you're right.
Road, we don't
Yep.
need that anymore. Did we already go to town meeting in order to sell it?
We did, and I don't think we
Did
ever
and
sold
we
it.
sold it. We didn't
Okay.
sell it. We
So-
did and we didn't sell it.
All right, so that's part of what we would need to look at all of that, and
Yeah.
then let's sell everything that we don't need anymore.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so that's, okay. Formation of a Memorial Day Committee. Now, the last couple of years, that's been ad hoc, and I've done it, and I don't mind doing it, but it used to be a committee appointed by the selectmen.
And then I think it fell off because people weren't encouraged to be on it, or so.
Do we have any talent banks for people that are interested in serving on a
There's no,
Memorial Day committee?
there is no
We
committee.
don't have that listed, and there's no committee.
Can we put out a plea that if anybody's interested in serving on a Memorial Day committee, to come forward and send Heather an email? I certainly welcome your involvement, Jamie. I think you've done a great job, but I also think that having one person do it by themselves is,
Well, I don't do it by myself. People do come forward and help, but I mean, I would love
to have a
to have
whole
a
group.
committee and somebody
Yeah.
who kind of sees it as their
So,
contribution to
agenda item?
town.
Agenda item to
agenda
Okay.
item, yep, and with a proposed charter.
Okay.
And membership.
Establish a flag policy procedure. That came up when we had some input from town people on whether they need to be lit, taken down at night,
Well, and I think we do.
you know,
need-
all that kind of stuff. We need a policy.
We need a policy.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think somebody provided us that it is not required under the flag code, but I think it'd be good to have that as agenda item.
Okay. BYOB liquor regulations, and there's something in your package about that.
So I reviewed them. Is it just the review of them? And I guess I question why, because I thought they seemed fine. Is there something we thought was missing?
Some of this
or-
goes back to when we had a couple of liquor license violations and what the discretion the police had and other things like that. And I think what we wanted to do was just go through the liquor license regulations with the police chief, just to verify that we understand what our role is and what the police chief role was. I don't think we're going to change anything.
Because I didn't,
But I don't think we have anybody with a BYOB license in town right now,
Yes,
do we?
Cabobalicious.
We do?
Cabobalicious.
That's
Well, no,
right.
you know what? They ended up.
They don't have any license right now.
But they don't have any license. But then they ended up coming back and getting a liquor and cordial. But they
Right.
also had the BYOB. I think they had.
Well, the regs say you can't do that. You can't have a BYOB if you have a liquor
It's one or
license.
the other.
Okay.
I-
Originally, they had a BYOB, I know that.
And when I was looking at this regulation, I was thinking, what do you do about a place like Shady Point? People come in for the day and they all bring liquor.
Well, they don't have a liquor license.
They're not serving it.
They're not
If the people are bringing it
But
themselves.
BYOB, you don't serve it.
But it goes along with another license that we give them. So if they're selling food in a restaurant that doesn't have a liquor license, the only way you can have liquor in that restaurant is with BYOB. So that's how they're licensed. So that's the statute for how you can do that.
But,
So-
and I think that, if a property owner invites people to their property, think about yourself. You have people over,
No,
they
well,
bring a
Shady Point's
case.
not a property owner,
But-
they're a business.
But do they they don't get a license from the Board of Selectmen, do they?
Not for serving alcohol.
Or food?
They,
Do they have a common vic license?
I don't think.
I don't think
they
Do they have an
serve.
entertainment license?
I don't think
They're
so.
commercially zoned.
They have a license from the Board of Health for a campground, but I don't think they have any license from
They
us.
certainly have entertainment.
That would be in the, probably December meeting when you did the renewals.
Yeah, they're
list of-
they're not on that
They're
list.
In the
not on
Google
that
Drive,
list.
so.
What should they be? I mean, they have entertainment, people bring liquor,
But they,
they're a business.
so therefore we need to have a workshop.
Wait, we're not bumping anything off
No.
this list.
No.
So the list isn't getting any
It
shorter.
also goes to just being understanding that as the licensing authority, we should know what we're licensing. So it's just sort of a good review of that part too, with the police chief there.
Well, and I would hesitate to do a whole workshop on that. I
No,
mean,
I
unless,
agree.
because there's not a whole lot. I mean, I think that could be an agenda item, is for the police chief to review the regulations and let us know if there's something that we should change. And if there's specific concerns that Mrs. Luck has relative to Shady Point and licensing, then we can ask the chief about
Yeah,
that.
I think the.
But it's an agenda more
yeah.
than a workshop.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be a workshop. I think part of the thing is that I guess I don't feel entirely comfortable when we have a liquor license violation that we have enough information all the time. And maybe this came up when we hadn't had any violations for a long time, and then all of a sudden we had a couple. So just maybe it's asking the police chief to talk about it. I agree.
Okay. Closure standards for earth removal permits. Now, that was underway.
The board had the meeting with the various earth
Right.
removal permit holders.
Mm-hmm.
But the closure standards, I think, is still ongoing.
But I thought the acting building inspector, or I'm not sure whether it's commissioner, had recommendations for changing the regulations because he found them sorely lacking when he reviewed. And having reviewed some other communities' earth removal permits, I think basically it looks like it's a cookie cutter across a lot of different towns. However, I think that our regulations, we do need to address a closure plan, and I did look at a couple different towns that have some interesting requirements on restoration provisions. And I think this is a workshop, and I think it's with input from, I can't remember whether he's the building commissioner or the building inspector.
It's,
Okay.
yeah.
But we need his input, because he actually said he had reviewed various regulations, and he actually recommended that our regulations be changed. So I think getting feedback from him and then looking at what other towns are doing.
And this also relates to what's going on in Uxbridge, where there have been lawsuits for bringing in hazardous or contaminated soil into the town, and how that might affect the water quality of the
Right, to
town-
meet the
town
requirements
wells.
for the topography, right.
So-
And actually, some towns actually have a testing requirement, so we do definitely have to look at this.
And this also goes to Adam's proposal that earth removal permits being moved from the selectmen to the planning board. I think this would be a good way just to discuss the whole process.
Yep.
Okay. Update toll booth policy to address reasons for denial.
So I think I'd put that on there, because if we're always going to approve it, why do we have to approve it? It should be a permit from the town manager with announcing it at our meeting. But if, for instance, if we say we're not going to give it to for-profit businesses, we should state that we are doing and I don't know whether we gave it, I didn't get to read it again tonight. If we give it for nonprofit entities, then it's self-fulfilling.
We do have a policy in there that says it is only for...
501c3, and you need to give your determination letter. So part of the thing goes is that we approve it, and if we're really approving it and we theoretically have the right to say no, when would we say no? And if we're always going to approve it, we really should just
Make it a permit. And
it's a permit that's approved, and you get to come here and get it announced, so.
I would question, let me first say, I support doing the boot drives, and I think that they make sense, and I know that there's been some posting on some social media questioning whether or not, we should allow them. Personally, I'm in favor of them, but I would question whether we want to limit how many. Because do we want, every weekend, or do we want one community, for example, in Northbridge, they allow one boot drive per month? Do we want to
be a
put
lot
any
even.
kind of restrictions?
Well, and then if
And
it's one...
how would you do that?
Yeah.
You might limit the number of times an organization could do a boot drive
So I
within
do
a
think we
year.
have to talk about it.
So,
Is it
yeah, so
maybe,
it's-
that's a good way to do it. Maybe an organization can only do 2 a year, but I do think we have to put some kind of parameters, because if we just make it a permit, realistically, we could potentially have boot drives every weekend. And I don't think any of us want that.
Yeah,
Well, the other thing is, too, is there's got to be some tie to the town of Lunenburg. Because you could have a 501c3
From anywhere.
from Boston who comes out here and wants to raise money, and if none of the money's coming to the town of Lunenburg for any benefit within the town, we really shouldn't be doing that either. So it sounds like we need to have a further
Okay.
discussion, whether it's a full
I
workshop.
think it's an
Yeah.
agenda.
But
At least an agenda item.
I do like the idea of laying it out in a policy and then not having to come to us.
I do too, but I think we have to
Yeah.
fine tune the policy.
And I understand why
Parameters.
they come here in order to advertise it, but I think they
Yeah,
could...
but they can do
could
that in
advertise-
public comment.
Right.
Okay. Update one-day liquor license policy to add insurance requirement.
Can we just, well,
Yeah,
we can't, it's an agenda item, but I
Yeah.
think we need to do that.
Well, I think it would be good to find out from town council or from Elaine, what do other towns do? Let's do, before we...
Maybe
And I think town council does have to weigh in on that, because it was a tangential but related topic last week.
Well, and what will the insurance cost the one-day liquor license? Because I believe Stillman Farms, do they sell beer there?
That
Yeah.
license
Yes.
went to the Lions,
And
though.
they do get
Right, but that's a one-day license.
They do get a
And
one-day
So
license.
what would the cost be to the Lions? I'd want to know what that would be for the
Maybe you could
insurance.
throw it in with number 11, because it's sort of related.
Yeah, related to liquor.
Okay, create a policy on signage in town, granting of placing signs on town property to nonprofits. Anybody recall what that one was?
I think we added that when the Lions Club wanted to put signs up, and we said
Okay.
who else gets to put signs up too.
Oh, that's right, because they were the signs were gonna go at all the entrances, you're entering a Lions community. And
Yeah.
how are
Right.
we
So
gonna approach that?
that was part of it. It was also went to, we have the granite post signs in front of the Ritter now, with the idea that people were supposed to use that to put post signs up versus
Putting them all over the lawn.
the
yeah.
large signs and stuff like that. I think it was just sort of a way to manage it. And how do we say no?
It has to be fair.
Yep. I don't think this should be a big thing, there should be a process, so people know what they can and can't do.
Agenda item?
Yeah, not a workshop.
Okay. Corey for limousine licenses.
So I had put this on because there's a requirement for doing Corey in taxi cab drivers, and since we licensed limousine licenses, we'd want to make sure that whoever the drivers are not going to violate the law.
Yeah, I agree. So
And I
that's an
think that
agenda.
Elaine sent us various towns' requirements that require that, so we should have, that should be agenda item.
Agenda item, yeah.
Yep. I thought that was a great idea.
Yeah, and I think that in preparation. I mean, we all have the sample text, or actually, we have the survey saying that towns do it, but if we can, if we can have a sample of how we would do it and then potentially just adopt it, because I think all of us think it's a good idea.
And to talk to the one limousine license holder that we have, just to make sure that this is not going to be burdensome to them.
Okay. And the posting of selectmen meetings for finance.
So we started addressing that at our last meeting to say that we only have to post meetings at which we may all be at if we are going to deliberate on issues. And if we are going to do that, I would suggest that we have a joint meeting with the Finance Committee so that, for instance, when we go to make our recommendation for town meeting, assuming if we're at the Finance Committee meeting, if they'd be willing to have a joint meeting so that they could take their vote, we could take our vote if we were all there. Otherwise, we would need to not deliberate and come back to our regular meeting. So I don't think we need to have this as a discussion item. I think we just need to make sure.
Yeah, the only wrinkle in that ointment is I'm hearing mixed information that if more than a quorum of us are at a meeting and we have not posted it and have determined that we're not going to deliberate, we can't even get up and make comments as individuals if...
That is not correct.
That's not, we could
Well,
ask town council for an opinion on that.
We
but
did, and that's...
So
it's
we
not
forfeit
clear.
our rights as a citizen by being an elected official?
So here's the story. Here's why Adam would say that. You get up there and talk. I get up there and talk. Phyllis gets up there and said, I disagree with the previous two speakers. We've started deliberating on something.
Okay.
As opposed to getting up there and saying, I don't think you should be doing this at Whalum. I think you should be doing it over at Shirley. And then somebody else discusses something else, but it's not all in sequence. So I could see why that would be the case.
Right. But therefore, while I don't necessarily, I think it, personally, I think it flies in the face of what open, I mean, if you're doing it openly at a meeting, it's an open meeting.
I agree.
But if that's the technicality, I think that we should think long and hard about posting and deliberating anytime we're going to be there.
Well,
if there's more than...
the other reason why it's an open meeting is to let the people know what you're going to talk about so they have the ability to listen to what you're going to talk about and actually show up. Now, with a lot of things being televised, that's less of an issue because people can see it later, but they want to actually hear you talk. So therefore, that's why you post it, so therefore you have an understanding of what might be discussed and you can go and listen. It doesn't necessarily mean you have the right to comment on it.
Is there a downside to posting it?
Well, we have to post an agenda as well, right?
Well, what Bob just said, if we post a meeting, we have to say, what are we going to talk about?
Right, so we have
And
to
if
have
we're
an
just in the
agenda.
audience at some other meeting, we're not sure what we're going to talk about till we hear what they're talking about.
Well, and theoretically, we would only go to the meetings, so for instance, budget season coming up, police, fire, and DPW budgets are going to be discussed. We would post selectmen to attend meeting to possibly make comments on the three budgets. So that's what the agenda item would be. So that you would be talking about that, because we wouldn't be...
So basically, we would mimic that section of the Finance Committee meeting, any
Yeah.
section we would talk about?
Yeah.
It's crazy to me.
there's-
It's crazy to me.
Yeah, but then the thing is then if we went and didn't make comments, then that, we wouldn't be able to make comments. So I think you could also, I believe we have the ability to do joint postings. And if we knew various meetings that the Finance Committee would have, for instance, your presentation to the Finance Committee of the budget, we usually try to get in a quorum of the meeting to attend that, to hear the presentation. That would be an appropriate meeting to either post by ourselves or ask the Finance Committee to say, would you be willing to post a joint meeting of the Selectmen and the Finance Committee? And then we meet the requirements of the posting to say we're there.
And then we can discuss whatever's on the agenda.
Yeah. The question then becomes minutes. Because you need to take minutes of actions you take. So the question,
I think
Yeah.
this deserves a little more background
therefore,
from town council.
We've discussed
and
this a lot to say we need to continue discussing this.
Well, let's,
And I think it would be good to have Adam come and actually what would be probably good for us to present 2 or 3 different scenarios and actually say, what does the Attorney General say on these specific things? Because this is when we have our counsel, but we also want to find out, will we be held in violation by the Attorney General? If the answer is no, regardless of what counsel says, then we can say, Attorney General has told us this, and if somebody complains, we can say, Attorney General has told us this.
Yeah, because this raises a whole bunch of questions in my mind about various scenarios of meeting attendance. Because, sometimes I go to a meeting and I don't know you're going to be there or you're going to be there. But, being an elected official to me doesn't mean that I forfeited my rights as a citizen. So if I want to talk at a school committee meeting or a conservation commission meeting or a planning board meeting, I want to make sure I can do that. So I think hearing from town council on those scenarios is important.
I think it goes to what we're deliberating on as a Board of Selectmen. So if it goes to our position on an article, the fact that we're going to vote on that, anything that goes on to the discussing the pros and cons of that article goes to deliberation, and yes, we should be posting that. So as opposed to maybe making comments and then coming back to the next meeting and actually taking deliberation action there. So we need to have Adam here and
But what are we doing for Thursday night?
Yeah.
I'm not going to be there, so.
I'm not going to be there either.
Good, then. Oh, no, you
is there
gotta-
going to be a quorum?
I probably will not be there, so we
Okay.
don't have a quorum.
We're going
All
to
right, then.
Okay.
cancel that meeting.
I will probably be watching on TV at some point, but I won't be
Yeah, I
there.
will watch it
Don't-
afterwards.
don't talk
but
to
I'll be out of
yourself.
town.
Well, I'm sorry, there's going to be three there, me, myself, and I. So,
Okay, and then the final one, and I don't know why it stands alone, is outstanding town meeting articles, but it's again the earth removal bylaw.
What do you mean town meeting article?
I didn't know.
Well, I
it was-
think-
It would require an amendment to the bylaws because right now it's the selectmen instead
yeah,
of the planning board.
yeah, so I think
Oh.
that sort of
Right.
it follows out of the other discussion.
Right, so
Okay,
we can
fair
put
enough.
that together,
Yeah,
right?
they're related.
So we
No, I
got two
don't-
things off the list.
I actually have something to add.
Oh,
You too.
When we were at the charrette about, the most recent charrette at the senior center, there was a woman who was really upset about Marshall Park, the traffic and the parking. And that brings to mind maintenance of all of the town green spaces. Wallace Park hadn't been looked at for 40 years. I mean, when are we going to address town parks?
But that's a park commission question. That really is a park commission question.
So that actually is before the charter committee, because right now, there's a provision that the town manager is responsible for the maintenance of facilities that are owned by the town or given to the town manager by bylaw or otherwise. So the question becomes, conservation is not, unless the conservation chooses to. The park is not, unless they choose to, except for the day-to-day operations. That is a little different. So right now, the charter says the parks are under the jurisdiction of the Parks Commission, except the day-to-day operation is under the town manager.
Okay.
So there is this little, it's under the town manager, but it's under the park department. So I think the concept of town property maintenance is a legitimate workshop for us to discuss. And not just parks. I think all town property discussion, regardless of what the Charter Commission does, I think we need to talk about that.
And I do think we need to revisit the parking at Marshall Park.
I mean, this woman was beside herself. She said, how long is it going to take for you people to do something?
Well, and I think the town manager has been working on this with the
Yeah.
parks.
The charter, though, does reference under the Parks Commission's laid out authority that they lay out and improve the public parks and make rules for their use. So that is
Do
pretty
they have the
specific.
money to
so
do that?
Well, that's a different discussion. That's when we go back to the Finance Committee to make sure, but
They don't
but you're
have
right.
any money, how are they going to do it?
Like,
Just a point to make.
so I
Have
think,
to put, if it's a capital project, they'd have to submit something to the capital planning committee.
right. Did you have something?
so a couple of things, and one of the things, I emailed Heather, and whether it's here or whether it's hers, I sent her some information on succession planning, particularly interested in department heads, as all of them will eventually retire. What's our process? And this sort of goes to the evaluation, supervision of personnel that we've been trying to include in collective bargaining agreements, and I believe it's in the salary administration plan about review and other things like that. But part of the process is if somebody gets hit by a bus, ultimately, how do we have something in place already? You know, who's the second in command, the deputy chief, the deputy, that type of thing.
That's a good
So,
thing
so
to
just sort of,
consider.
it's sort of a bigger thing and just longer thing. I'm not sure if it's us or if it's you, but I think it's something you do. The other thing was you had received the grant for the animal control facility, just making sure that we have that whole process in there. And those are the two things I had. I don't think those are workshops.
No. All righty. All right, thank you. That was our workshop to create more workshops. Minutes, we only have the one executive session minutes that went down last week, but we only got 2 signatures because I was not at it. So someone who was at the executive session but wasn't here last week needs to sign that. Warrants,
Sorry.
there's one?
Yes, it was one large one.
One large one. Accounts payable in the amount of $392,313.08. Any action file issues? Any more action file issues?
Yes. I think all of us received correspondence from the town manager today relative to the questions, outstanding issues at the school. I still remain extremely concerned, and I would not support signing for the release of the final payment, and I have a number of additional questions. I have forwarded those questions to the town manager, but I think this is something that needs to remain on, or needs to be placed on an agenda, because the responses that we got to me were not satisfactory.
I didn't think so either.
And additionally, I have questions relative to, and I used to go through every line, and quite frankly, I don't do that anymore. But I am actually asking that any payment related to the HVAC system be flagged on warrants, so that we can know what payments are being made on the HVAC system, as well as any payments on the ceiling panels. I know that it said that they're being replaced in February, and I understand that, but my understanding also is that we have to get a lift. I would question whether we bought the panels. I would question whether we're paying for the lift. I want to know if we are assuming costs that, in my opinion, we should not be assuming. So I want those kind of expenditures related to repair of the facilities at the school to be flagged.
Okay.
Just to, I did forward your questions on to the superintendent. She's going to look into them.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Committee reports?
Nothing for me.
Zach?
Yep, the Stormwater Task Force met last Thursday. DCI, our consultants on the Community Compact Grant, presented maps and included 25 identified priority BMPs.
BMP is?
Best management practice, including sites, priority ranking, approximate cost estimates. 9 of the sites were identified as candidates for possible 319 grant submissions due to their locations. The Community Compact Grant final report will include glossy maps we can use for education, finalize the ranking, prioritize task completion dates, determine specific plans for completion of tasks, determine approximate cost, suggest the best management practice alternatives to be done, publish the list based on above. It's projected that the tasks identified will be completed over the next 10 years. We're going to review and finalize the suggested ranking at the next Stormwater Task Force meeting on March 1st. This rank list will be used to prioritize which projects will be good for those 319 grant submissions. There's a 319 grant pre-request for proposal meeting at DEP in Worcester on March 6th. Adams, Bernie's going to come, I'm going to go, and so isn't one of our consultants.
Just have a question on that.
Hold on. Good.
The tasks that you mentioned, you said were going to be completed over 10 years?
The,
On the
all of
grant?
all of the projects will take
Projects
10 years.
identified that they will want to do work on.
Okay, but,
Culverts and this and that and the other thing.
but the grant funds, the 25,000 through Community Compact, when will those funds be expended by?
Oh, I think very soon, don't you? I think that was the mapping, was the 25,000.
Okay.
Well, yeah, we don't have to worry about that.
Because we don't have 10 years to
No. No, that's
finalize that
10-year
grant.
items, you can apply for funding for those in each year.
Yeah, right. You know, it's replace a culvert here, or repair a catch basin
Thank you.
there, and we're ranking them. You know, this 500 in town, but a couple hundred are just fine, and we don't have to think about. They looked at a couple hundred and sorted down to finding the 27 biggest impact. You know, where we will get the most water quality improvements. The school committee is going to meet tomorrow night. They are meeting in executive session to discuss preparation for negotiations with the Lunenburg Educational Association and non-union personnel. You know, I think that since the school department is responsible for 75% of the town's future OPEB liability and 78% of our current OPEB liability, it's imperative that there be an understanding of how the school department can work with the town to reduce future OPEB liability. When I was at the MMA workshop, they talked about, you know, aside from putting money aside, you've got to figure out a way to reduce your liability. And negotiations with the town's workers is really how you have to address that. And there really have to be discussions about that.
Ms. Bertram?
Not a whole lot. Conservation has had a snowstorm the last couple meetings, so they haven't met. Next meeting is the 21st. The MPO did have a regular meeting, and there's currently an amendment that's out for comment. We're starting the TIP process. Remain, as I said earlier, I'm a little concerned about the Summer Street project coming in so under budget and what adjustments will be needed for that. But we did have a sub-region meeting, and there were some members from Devon's there, as well as AIR, and our DPW superintendent was there. Phyllis attended, but it was an informative meeting just about how the MPO sort of works and what the process is to get a project. But the recommendation, the takeaway from that meeting, I think for all of us, was that on federal aid eligible roads, we should be doing them parallel. We should be looking at funding on local, but we should also be looking at incorporating them in the TIP. And we have many federal aid eligible roads in Lunenburg. And there is, you know, incorporating complete street components into roadways can be done through the TIP and through TIP funding. So that was interesting. And then at the end of the meeting, there was a plug for projects under the Unified Planning Work Program. And I've talked about this before. Basically, it's funds that's allocated for the planning agency to do various projects in the communities that it serves. So if we want a walkability study, for example, or we want a parking study, or we need to submit, basically contact Brad Harris, submit the project, and it would be considered for funding. So, you know, we really need to start taking advantage of the services that MRPC can provide. And I know Heather's done a fantastic job of doing that, but I think we can expand on that. And they're actually doing a plug right now to identify projects for this UPWP. So if there are things that we want to consider, we should certainly look at them. Complete Streets may be one of them. They may be able to provide some expertise on that, since we're doing the workshops and we're moving forward with that. They may be able to provide some planning services free of charge. So, you know, if we are going to consider it, we need to do it ASAP. Our next meeting will be the end of the month, and we'll be starting the TIP process, and we'll be really fleshing out the UPWP. So That's it from me.
Nothing for me.
And nothing from me. Before I go to public comment and executive session, just our upcoming meetings, I think we just agreed that we're not going to post or participate in Thursday night's meeting as a body. So we,
I'll be out of town.
okay, and I won't be there as well. And February 20th, I will not be here as well, so I assume Mr. Ebersol will
Yes.
take care of that one. Before I ask for a motion to enter executive session, is there any public comment from the public? Sir, Mr. Rogers.
OPEB, MPP, BMP rather, and MPO. You guys know what all of this is, but if we're at home, we haven't got a clue. So it would really be great if you could explain that. When Heather prepared the 5-year projection, we couldn't see it at my house. We had to wait, for 3 or 4 days before we could get it off the website, et cetera. So these are all things that I'd like you to take into consideration, because you guys know it, you deal with it every day, but, Joe Citizen out in the hinterlands does not. How much did we pay Vertex for what they did for us?
The appropriation at town meeting was $50,000.
$50,000.
That
Okay.
added the 2 buildings for an additional 15.
So it's 65.
No, total of 50.
I was 40,
It was 35 before.
Yeah. Okay, good. When will the public get an opportunity to ask questions about the report and receive the report, or be able to?
As we stated, the report will be on the website.
Okay, when?
Try to get up as soon as possible.
Probably tomorrow.
Yep.
Okay.
Depends on when Steve can get it up.
Yep. It's not
3 or 4 days, we'll have it,
Yep.
right?
by probably the end of the week, I
Okay.
would assume.
All right, because it's, that's fine. Okay. I don't know if I know any more tonight than I did before. I heard what they came forth with. Okay? And I'm not here to bash anybody or anything, but I thought Damon said at the special town meeting that this is a way that we could figure out what the square footage was and get an idea around what, it's going to cost us. So those are things that concern me. I really have to know what we're talking about to make an informed decision.
Yeah, sorry, but they didn't present they had a package for each building. You'll see it when they put it online. There's about 80 pages for each building.
Yeah.
There's a lot more information to sift through than what they just put up on the slide tonight.
Okay. I'll look forward to hearing that. But when will we be discussing this? When will this board be discussing that? In terms of the public, so that we'll...
Is there a public comment in there, Mr. Rogers?
Well.
I mean...
Okay, that's fine.
I think we mentioned that the next steps were for us to evaluate the data and come up with some recommendations for the town to look at.
Yeah, okay. I'm not here to argue with anybody. I'm just telling you, I'm sitting here and I don't know any more today than I did before, but that's just me. Bonding capacity. The public comment I have is, what is our bonding capacity for the town? It's 14% of what?
I would have to find that out.
Okay. Do you know where we are right now? What our capacity is right now? And the reason I'm asking this question is it's really basic common sense. When Karen and I moved to town and we were looking for a house, we only had so much money to spend. So I think it's a great idea for us to know going forward what the capacity is and how much we have and what the delta is and what we could look forward to. That's basic common sense, because we seem to be chasing our tail, going around and going around. Thank you for the opportunity for public comment.
I do want to just answer your question. One of the questions that Mr. Rogers raised is the MPO. I'll just explain what that is. It's the Montechusett Planning Organization, Metropolitan Planning Organization, and what that group does is it takes, looks at the federal funds that are allocated for a region, determines how they should be spread, so transportation funds. So we look at all the transportation funds that are available, and then based on the projects that are submitted, determine how they're going to be distributed throughout the region. So that's what the MPO does.
Okay. And OPEB is the other post-employment benefits. It's generally insurance, and at this point, I think the town pays 75%.
Correct.
And the employee pays 25%, and it's all retirees. So retirees from the school system and the town, which is why the school system is 75% of the $48 million liability. So it's a big number.
Any other public comment?
Hello, Julia Callahan, 24 Beale Street. Just a quick question. Article 1 was amended at special town meeting to add Eagle House and Turkey Hill Elementary for the property condition assessment, and I know the gentleman from Vertex did mention those two buildings. So I was just wondering if there's a timeline for when to expect a report on those buildings, as I believe that they're a really important part of this discussion as well.
I would expect 2 to 3 weeks
Okay.
to put that together to be reasonable. I can check on
Are
that.
they coming back to present on those two, or would that be something
No,
that would be
I
out on the
don't believe
website?
so. Yeah, but they would be available for the public.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any public comment from the board?
I guess I do have one, and that is the next steps. We talked about what the next steps are, and I agree, it's getting input from the public. And I guess I keep talking about coming up with a schedule for charrettes and workshops, and I think we do need to do that. Whether it be a workshop amongst us and then we expand it to the public, or whether it be getting the surveys back, but I do want to keep us moving forward. And I think it's important that we identify a timeline. So whether it be milestones in a timeline, or whether it be, workshop dates, but I think it is important that people know, once they get this information and once they review the reports, when they are going to have an opportunity to comment, when they are going to have an opportunity to talk about them. I think it's important. So I do think we need to and the more advanced information we can get. I was really, really happy with the amount of people that we have coming to workshops. And I think we want to expand on that. So I think publishing the dates as far as we can in advance and having thoughtful discussions is an important part of this plan. And I'd like for us, this board, and the town manager to establish some of those dates. ASAP.
I'd entertain a motion to enter executive session under Mass General Law, Chapter 30, Section 21, under reason number 2, to conduct contract negotiations with non-union personnel if any open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the government's bargaining position and the chair declares so. Subject is the town manager's contract, not to return to public session.
So moved?
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor? Mr. McQuaid?
Aye.
Mrs. Luck?
Aye.
Ms. Bertram?
Aye.
Mr. Ebersol?
Aye.
And I for myself. Good night.